everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 9th. The time is 4:01 p.m. and we are convened as the Provo City School Board of Education. We're meeting at 280 West, 940 North in Provo, Utah, and we will begin with a roll call. I'm Jennifer Partridge, Board President.
Gina Hills, Board Vice President.
Melanie Hall, Board Member.
Megan Wagner, Board Member. Rachel Rue, Student Board Member.
Emily Harrison, Board Member.
Terry Gage, Board Member. Devin Daly, Business Administrator.
Wendy Dow, Superintendent.
Okay. And we want to welcome everyone that is joining us today in person and online. And do we have a motion to start our study session?
I move that we start our study session.
Okay, motion made by Board Member Hall. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Board Member Van Wagenen. All in favor?
Aye.
We are now in study session. And we're going to go ahead and begin with our board training by Vice President Gina Hills.
Thank you. So we're going over business meetings today. I feel like we already know what we're doing because we've had so many of them lately. But I'll just highlight a few things. Typically, they are held on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. There are a few exceptions to this, but for the most part, second and fourth Tuesday, although this month is one of the exceptions because our next meeting will be the fourth week, but will be on Friday because it will be our all-day meeting. Robert's Rules of Order is basically how, rules for interacting so that things don't really get out of hand. We follow Robert's Rules of Orders, but not necessarily to the T, and I think it works well for us. We're able to have conversations and have the discussions that we need to have. Our opening remarks, we take turns doing opening remarks, and we like to keep it to about 2 minutes because we're usually running a very tight ship. Tonight is a good example of that. We have so many things on the schedule. So we try to keep it to no longer than 2 minutes. They usually can include a reflection, a prayer, or welcoming words related to education. I know that Board Member McCabe has sometimes had people come in and from different schools and do different things, which is great as long as we let everybody know what's happening and so that everybody is on the same page. We have the roundtable, which is basically how we report the things that we're doing on our committees and our other assignments. I'm not going to go over the calendaring of board meetings and refer the public to, I don't know, do they have access to our handbook? It's basically the second and fourth Tuesdays, except for our all-day meetings and then our special meetings. So
it's not on the website.
We also sometimes have hearings. Tonight is also a good example of that. We're having a special hearing, and then we had a hearing last week, or no, study session business meeting last week, which wasn't a regularly scheduled one. But we, from time to time, have different hearings for bonding, truth and taxation, and then just different things. And there's different laws and statutes that we follow for that. And then in order to hold a meeting, we have to have a quorum, which means we have to at least have 4 board members present. If you don't have 4 board members present, then we don't meet. And then we can have meetings electronically, and I actually had someone comment yesterday how grateful they are that these are now recorded and they can go back and look at them, and that it's very helpful for them to have these things, our meetings electronic. Our all-day meetings are twice a year, and like I said, once is in September, sometimes early October, but this year it is in September, and then mid-March to mid-April. So that's where they used to call these retreats, and I'm really glad they don't, because a retreat makes you feel like you're at a spa, that we're not at a spa, we're just sitting there. So it's one of these meetings, but all day long. So we have that coming up it's the fourth week, right?
This time it's the third. It's the third Friday of the third week.
Friday of the third week. Okay, so it's on the, I should write that down. It's on the 19th. But basically that gives us more time to be able to study some of the issues that we need to study, and we have some big issues that we need to look at, such as boundaries and things like that. And then we welcome and encourage public comment in our board meetings. There's a policy that we have that governs that, but we also try to, basically each person gets 3 minutes, unless they're representing a group, they get a couple more minutes. And I feel like our public comment has been good. So.
Okay, thank you, Vice President Hill. We'll move on to item number 5, which is our student travel requiring board approval.
Start with Shoreline,
okay.
and they're going to Washington, D.C.
You guys wanna come?
I thought, oh, you guys brought, oh
I
my gosh.
brought just some stuff. This is what our students do to prepare. I only have 4 of them, but you can kind of pass them around, see what the requirements are for our students to get all prepared to go. And then I just have a fun little slideshow of our students enjoying DC that'll just loop as we talk. But
Alright, go ahead and
oh, okay. So we've been doing this trip for a long time. Jared would actually probably know when we started it. How long has it been? Because it's been going since I came in 2013. Yeah, so we've been going for a long time to Washington, D.C. And then back probably I don't know what year was the first year we did the Boston trip either, but it was before the pandemic. We had a lot of interest from our students, and we had so many great students applying that we saw the need to add 2 trips, so we added a Boston trip, but after the pandemic we just haven't had the numbers to fill both trips, so we made the decision to alternate. So we did DC back in 2024, Boston in 2025, and then our hope is to do DC in 2026. So we usually take a group, sometimes 32, sometimes 36, depending on the year. So they're in groups with 3 adults with them. What other questions you guys want to know?
I just want to say I think it's great. That's my son Henry
Aww.
right there in that picture.
Aww.
He got to go when he was a little guy.
I didn't tell her to do that.
Yeah, I went digging through the Facebook to find all of them from different years. I think there might even be a few pictures in here with Jared's in with them too. So, but yeah, so we pick the students out early in the year so that they can meet with us after school twice a month. They have to do assignments and prepare so that when we go to the different memorials, like when we go to the Vietnam Wall, they've researched someone from Utah who passed away in the Vietnam War, and they have written a thank you note to that soldier. They go find their name, they do a rubbing of their name, leave the thank you card. When we go to the Pentagon Memorial, they have a specific bench of somebody who passed away that they go find, do a rubbing of their name. So it really helps the students be more involved with these museums and memorials that they're going to go see.
Do you have them, do they meet regularly through the, maybe you said this and I was not paying attention, my bad. Do you have them meet regularly beforehand so that they're studying things prior to, I seem to remember students saying they studied maybe art and some history, is that right?
Yeah, so we have meetings twice a month. They stay after school for about 45 minutes, so it's like an extra class period on those days, and we have the different topics that go through them. Yeah, so, but we cover everything, yeah, so we ask our chaperones that are coming, so Mr. Harris has gone with us in the past, so he'll come teach a lesson about the art museum and stuff like that. So.
And do the kids, so if they stay after 45 minutes, is there an after-school bus that can help some kids get back?
There is, yeah.
Could you talk about how the students are given, what opportunities you give them for fundraising, for pay for it, and also I'm just curious if it's getting harder and harder to stay within our $2,000 limit, what you guys are doing to address that.
So what opportunities that we give them, we do a SWIG fundraiser, and a lot of parents really like that one because they're already getting their SWIG anyway, so they are happy to buy some SWIG cards and help out. We also do Krispy Kreme, and then last year they started a new one that was some thank you cards from a company that reached out to us. Last year that we went in 2024, we did it at the 1800. So this year will give us an extra $200 in the budget that we could if prices have gone up.
And they have. That's what we saw with Boston, is the flights and hotels have gone up, but we were still able to do it within budget for Boston, so we think we can do the same for DC.
Okay. Any other questions?
Do you find that there's a bunch of students that want to participate but aren't allowed to participate? Like, you have to turn away?
There's a handful, and typically a lot of them are alternates, and so we have some that do drop out and they're let in at that point, but I think that there's a handful. But we're also very selective in the students that we take too, because we want it to be students that we can trust and that will behave well and, you know, make it a good experience for everyone involved. So.
I had a question. I noticed that Breeze has a non-stop flight from Provo to
That's what we were looking at checking out.
I don't know if it's cheaper, but that would be very I flew it just
Oh, huh?
a couple
Oh.
months ago.
Uh-huh.
It was lovely, and
Oh,
it was
good.
about $700 cheaper than Delta to
Oh,
Or
awesome.
to Salt Lake to DC on Delta.
So in your selecting of students, do they do like an application process then? Like what does that look like? Of how
So-
you are kind of choosing them?
In order to apply, they have to come to a meeting. So we're going to run them before school as soon as we get the approval. We'll get our posters up. So they come show up. They learn a little bit about it. We tell them you will be doing assignments. You will be doing a lot of walking. That it's a history trip, not just a vacation. And we let them know what's expected. And then from there, we give them the application. They have a series of questions they have to fill out and answer the questions. Then we grade them blindly, so me, Mr. Hershey, and then we'll invite another teacher to help out. We score them, and then we take the top so many, and then from there we kind of feel like, oh, we have to fill a girls' room and balance out. So, yeah.
All right. This will be up for consideration to approve at our business meeting tonight. Thank you, Shoreline, for being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you.
And now we'll turn it over to Provo High Performing Arts, I believe, Cindy White.
Want me to go over there too?
Thank you.
Sorry.
And I sent this kind of late, but I did send you, board members, an email that had a lot of his answers to some of the questions about the trip. Oh, okay, great.
Would you like me to tell you about the trip, or you know
Yes,
about it
please.
already?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the year after COVID, we took our first trip to New York with the Combined Performing Arts Department, and it was a really awesome experience for our students. We were able to show our performers shows on Broadway and plays, and attend a concert at Carnegie Hall, different museums, art museums and things. So this was, the vision is to just kind of recreate that experience for this group of students. It's been about 4 years since we went, so there's no returning kids. I know that performing arts typically tend to travel out of state every year, and I know that's kind of a concern for some of you sometimes. It might be a big burden on families. So I was actually asking the director, it turns out only 2 of the 7 groups that are going traveled out of state last year. So most of the kids that are traveling with us, hoping to travel with us this year, this will be a first opportunity in the last couple of years to travel out of state. That we've been working with Infinity Tours, they've planned trips for us in the past, and we've had a really good experience with them. They make sure to provide hosts for us while we're on site, so they can help us navigate transportation, show tickets, and everything to make sure things are going really smoothly, so we can maximize our time supervising kids and making sure they're safe and having a great experience. So, yeah.
I have a question. Do you have, Mr. Weiser? I was looking at the sample itinerary. I saw, I think it was choir.
Mhm.
We'd get to do some workshops and things like that. Will all the performing groups have those kinds of opportunities?
Yeah, so we're all going to be able to see 2 Broadway shows and then a 3rd performance in our area of study. Art is going to, since they're more focused on art, it's less of a performance art, they're going to be spending more time in museums than some of the rest of the groups. And then each performing group will also have opportunity to do, I think usually 2, sometimes 3 different classes or workshops in New York. One of them is a Broadway rehearsal workshop we've done in the past with cast members of Wicked. They'll teach us music, and we'll learn some of the choreography. It's really a good time. It's great for the kids. Yeah.
Fundraising, what are you guys doing for that?
Yeah, so we have 3 or 4 different fundraisers scheduled right now to help with individual student fees. And then we also have, because of the cost of the trip to go to New York and have all these experiences, the chaperone cost isn't wrapped into the student fee. The $2,000 that's their fee, and that's going to cover all of their expenses. And so we're planning department-wide concerts for December as a big fundraiser to raise enough money for our chaperones to cover those fees as well. Additionally, each program is planning, they normally plan different fundraisers throughout the year for their program, and those fundraisers are going to help cover costs of students that might be on fee waiver and have additional financial needs.
Is one of your fundraisers, I read something, I can't remember which group it was, but someone at Provo High is doing, people donating clothing and stuff, and they're almost like a thrift store type of a thing?
I don't know about that one.
Okay.
That was announced at the football game, and I think it was
dance company or something
okay,
else.
not good.
It might be one of their
Something
program fundraisers that
Okay.
I'm not aware of, but,
Okay, got
but
it.
for this trip, it's not one of ours.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Go ahead, Mary.
I just want to comment because I was a parent at your parent meeting.
Oh, yeah.
and I think this probably goes for all of our group planning these trips. I was like, it was a great reminder of all the effort that goes into making these plans and trying to stay within the confines of all the requirements. And I really I do love that you guys are going as these multiple groups together and coordinating with each other as faculty, but also these students, the opportunity for them to kind of mix with the other performing arts groups as well. Anyway, I was just, grateful for the effort that goes into making these things happen for our students.
Thanks.
Yeah. I noticed, I was just reading over the email that you provided answers, thank you,
Yeah.
to Superintendent. And I noticed on the last one, your flight will be landing really late.
Yeah, we do
kids-
land that evening.
Do you have the kids like committing to go to school the next day, or what are we?
I mean, we're following the policy to only plan travel for two school days, and so I think in that scenario, it's just between students and parents. Just like if it's a snowy day or something, they have to make the best decision for them, I think.
Can I request that you plan your itinerary so you land more like 8 p.m. or something, not, this suggests it might be midnight when you're landing.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I can't remember exactly the time from the travel agent, but I know getting earlier flights costs more money. And when that plane ticket costs as much as it does, it makes it really difficult to do other things that we're planning to do in New York. And we'd explored like going different dates and different times, and there's been a lot of back and forth with the travel agent about this, and this is like the best deal they can get for us so that we can have the experience we're hoping to have with the students.
I did just jump on Delta a few hours ago, and they had reasonable rates for their 8 p.m. landing flight. So maybe right now is a good time to buy. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
it also is
important
tricky
to-
because we have such a big group of people. Because we're
Right.
looking at taking about 150 to 180, and sometimes rates are different depending on the size of group you have. And things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be happy to let them know you're concerned.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to send the message that we do care about your academic success as well, and being in school is important, and we might have to make adjustments to our trip to send that message.
How would you balance that with the budget restrictions that we have?
That is a great question. I mean, you might have to
Miss a
cut
show
one
or
day
a museum
short
or
or miss an
Yeah.
opportunity, right?
But then we're there
Maybe
spinning
not
our
go to
wheels.
Owen
I guess
Stardust
that's what I'm
Center.
worried
I don't know,
about.
like, there's trade-offs.
Maybe I can get you free backstage to the Radio City because I used to work for them.
Oh wow, cool.
Oh, there you
Do it, very easy.
Great. Let's
Just let me
let's
know.
connect. Okay. Cool.
And I will contact my own boss.
Okay, sounds good.
I
Any
mean,
other
to me,
questions?
it's balance between letting them have experiences to visit places as students, right, and that exposure, but also, like, my own kids have gone on trips before where they did see a lot of great things, but they didn't actually perform, and they weren't actually participating in that way. And I do feel like when we're using, school days and this much work, I do think it really, like, there are a lot of quality opportunities that are maybe hard to come up with, but that are not expensive, that would save money, but also that would get our kids like contributing and doing more of their craft in the city. And so, like, I always think that that's an important piece of a trip like this.
Yeah,
and
we
if there's
definitely
a way
have-
to get them back in
and those
time.
are planned, for
Yeah,
sure.
I saw some of those, yeah. So, I mean, I also feel concerned about the missing school piece of it. I don't know.
Okay. Anybody else with questions or thoughts? All right. Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Ryder.
great, thanks.
Appreciate being here tonight. Our next agenda item is we are bringing back our Dixon site discussion to receive more information as we're taking long-term look and making decision over time. Wendy, I'll turn it over to you, and you can kind of lay out how we're going to approach this tonight?
We're going to start with this awesome presentation from Principal Wolf from Timpanogos Elementary.
And can I just say for the public,
Yeah.
some people might say, you're talking about Dixon site, why are you bringing the Timpanogos principal in? And we've heard concerns about your site and some of the constraints that you have, and some community members have approached us about using the Dixon site to rebuild the elementary school there to address some of those concerns. So that's why we wanted to bring you here today and share with us what you're seeing.
Awesome. So I have the presentation. Do you want to ask questions as I'm presenting or after?
Why don't you go through your presentation and
Okay.
ask questions at the end?
Perfect. Well, I just want to thank the board for letting me come. On behalf of, I have lots of families that have come to me almost on a daily basis. They're asking, have they made a decision yet, or do we get to move, or not? So I appreciate that I'm here on behalf of them to advocate for them, and not just what I want, but also I feel like what our parents, our PTA, our school community council, all of those individuals are hopefully represented in their voice here tonight. And just tell you a little bit about Timpanogos. If you don't know about Timpanogos, it's pretty unique. We have about 89 new to country kids. So these are kids that come to us. They don't speak English. They're new to the country, coming into our school, and that's happening every year. So we have kids this year, those 89 that are just learning English and coming in. So it's a unique situation that we're in. And I tell you that because last year we had 2 of our elementary classes that had 15 kids that didn't speak English, and in a kindergarten class. So think of new kindergartners coming in, 15 of them don't speak English, and you're teaching these classes. And we don't know a lot of times the mental health issues or challenges that these kids come with. And last year we had 2 kids that just took off running right at the beginning. And we're like, whoa, what's going on? And we didn't realize they had some mental health challenges. There was some autism and stuff that they were dealing with. This year, again, we had some kids out of country come in that were autistic that we didn't realize that they didn't understand certain things. I saw the parents the first day, and they were like standing around and waiting. They parked their car across the street and just stood there and watched all day. And I'm a little concerned. So the next day I say, hey, I saw you were out there and watching, what's going on? And they said, well, our kids, they've been in daycare. They go at 6 in the morning and they get out at 6 in the evening, and they're locked in. And we're really worried because at home we keep them locked in all the time, because if they're out, they just run to the streets. And they said they have these challenges. They don't understand these boundaries. Well, the next day I'm in the office and I hear the aide come running out. So I had assigned a one-on-one aide with this student, because I'm like, we're not having this student run until we can get some testing done and figure out what's going on. Well, this student was able to get away from her, takes off. She yells, there's a student running. I'm in the office. I look and I see it hit the door. And I have never run so fast since I was in 6th grade elementary, running the mile to catch this student. And he was just going straight for 500 North. Within a few feet, I caught him from going into the road. A lot of our kids have toxic stress. That caused me some major toxic stress. I dealt with our kids that got hit over at Timpanogos really closely with that family. And some of that kind of came back to me like, oh my gosh, I was just feet away from a kid running into a street that's constantly busy, 35 to 40 mile an hour cars that are constantly going past there. So for me, it just ratcheted it up again this year, because that could have ended in disaster. If I hadn't been in the office, if nobody else heard, so nobody else would have been there, we could be looking at a whole different situation. That's happened again this week with the 1st grader. We caught him just before he went into the street. And I don't know if it's like, what's going on? Why is this increasing? But that is a danger. It's a safety hazard. If there's any way that we could get off that street, I strongly recommend that we make that change. And I feel like the Dixon site would be a great site where you could make it 20 miles per hour all the way around. They can't change the speed limit. I've gone to the city and asked them, and they've said, the district's talked about that, but they will not change the speed limit there. I've had teachers talk to me. We have had kids hit in that crosswalk 12 to 15 years ago. Luckily, nothing since then, and I'm hoping nothing happens again. But safety-wise, my recommendation is that we move the school for safety over to the Dixon site. Now, another thing that I created is I talked to Joey and Kyle, each year they come and they walk around the school and they tell us, hey, this is what we need to keep your school up to where it needs to be and the things that are breaking down we need to fix. But we're not going to do that until a decision's made. So they said there's $5.8 to $6.5 million worth of things that need to be repaired or fixed at the school. And I kind of did line items here for those. But we're not going to do that until we know if we're moving or not. Because if you're going to retrofit the building, then we're not going to change everything and then re-change everything again if that happens. There are some safety issues in here as well. If you go to the next, the parking lot issues, these are our kids coming in the morning. Over here you only have about a 2.5, not quite 3 feet that they can walk through right here. They have to be out in the street, and then all of our cars are coming in right here. Our parking lot was not designed to have multiple people coming and dropping kids off at this school. If our staff is here, there's almost no parking for anybody else to be there. And then you have this situation where cars are barely getting through. We're constantly having fender benders, those type of issues. Plus, this is not ADA compliant, so you have up and down over 2 curbs here. We have several parents and grandparents that are in wheelchairs, and we have I didn't put them in here, but there's pictures of them trying to lift them over these curbs and up and over to get in here. So that's something that definitely needs to be fixed. It's a safety issue there.
Can I ask, is this road that's right here?
This is 500, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of so this is a pretty busy thoroughfare, and then you have 500 west that's very busy and only seems to be getting busier.
Yeah.
Okay, you can go to the next. Another thing is it's a main place that they drop people off on the bus, so we get a lot of transient people there. We've had drunk people, we've had to call the police and say, hey, this guy's just sitting out front with his beer bottle, can you come and ask him to leave? All types of interesting people that come along that street there. You have constant fire engines, police going back and forth because you're right by the hospital. You're just down from the police station as well. And then we have parents, because they can't get in there, they park on the sides and they're like coaxing their kids to come across the street, even though we begged them not to do that. You still have these kids running across, not in the parking areas, across those busy streets. All right. Our security problems in the building too. So our secretaries sit like this, looking forward. The entrance to the building's over here, and they sit down, and the window to see who's coming in is higher than what they can see over. So they would have to be standing all day to see that entrance, or we'd have to like lower that window or do something so that they could see the people coming in. We had a really angry parent last year that got in because they caught the door, and that happens all the time. Somebody comes in and they just catch the door, and then they're in, and nobody knows that they're in our building. All of the elementaries I've been in, you at least have some type of direct sight to people coming in the building, so you can see that happening. At Timpanogos, we don't have that as an option. Do you want to go to the next one? Our portables are also a safety issue. They're falling apart. They smell musky. They leak. They're really small. They're not big enough to have class sizes in, so we do our music and our art classes out there in the portables, and there's constantly classes in those classes. But then you have first graders, kindergartners that have to go back and forth with a fob by themselves, fob into the building, go all the way down the hall, past the office to go use the bathroom. No water facilities or bathroom facilities are out there, and that's been an issue with us losing kids. They don't return. We're trying to find them. Where did they go? So that's definitely a safety issue. I know there's several buildings in the district that have those art and music rooms inside the building. In fact, we only have 3 kindergarten rooms that have bathrooms in them, and then we converted our music room into a kindergarten room so that we could have 4 kindergarten rooms. And so that room doesn't have a bathroom. They have to go way down the hall to use the bathroom. It doesn't have a secure entrance or exit, which all the other kindergarten rooms do, with a fence around them. And then just to show you our demographics, this is a 6th grade class this year. That's the English side. This is very representative of most of our English classes. You'll have 12 of the 22 students that are ML students. 59% of those students have IEPs or 504s. Over 50% of them have significant behavior needs. And this shows what their IEPs are in and what this teacher would be working with in this classroom. If you want to go to the next slide. These are the their scores on math and science. So they're coming in from last year. We have 14 of those kids in that class are at a level 1, both in math and in science. So you have a lot of need. And that level 1 doesn't just say they're level 1 in 6th grade. They could be all the way down. There's several kids in that class that are still working on kindergarten, 1st grade reading and math. And the reason I show you this is that the science says that with these kids, they have to be in 3 to 5 kids in small groups learning to catch up, to make the growth that we need to catch these kids up. They can't even read in 6th grade. To get them by the time they're seniors to be able to graduate and pass, they have to have that small group work. And our school just does not have the space to run these small groups. We can run 4 small groups, but that's about it. And that, if you have a class of 30 kids, how do you run? That would be like 8 to 10 groups that we need. We can only run 4. And several times we're not even able to do that. If you go to the next slide. We only have 1 classroom that's an intervention room where we can go and put 5 small groups in there, and the whole school uses that, so kids come from all over the school to go to that intervention room. Our hallways are narrow and small. We're not able to do intervention groups in the hallways. We do have little alcoves that are about 30 by 10 feet. They have, for some reason, they built stadium seating in these alcoves. There's 2 of them. We do run some groups there, but you have 8 classrooms on 1 floor to try to run intervention groups for 8 classes in that teeny area with everybody talking and kids passing. It's just super hard. And with all the testing that needs to be done one-on-one, to find space somewhere where you have a quiet space to test a student where there aren't kids going by is practically impossible in our school right now, to find that kind of space. This is our 1st grade classroom. This is kind of what it looks like with 30 kids. Most 1st graders want to have some time where you're on the carpet, and then intervention time. There's 2 intervention rooms in here for those 30 kids. It's hard to have a class like this be able to go to the carpet or have any carpet time. And when you have 30 kids, you need to keep them moving and learning in different places. And so that just to kind of see some of the difficulties in space, I asked Joey, are our rooms smaller than normal classrooms? He said, they seem smaller. He's like, I don't know for sure, but your classroom sizes seem smaller than other places. There's 2 workrooms on each floor. You can see they have some electrical things here. These say that be careful, you could die from arc, so don't get close. When I took the picture, this was open for some reason. I tried to close it, I couldn't, but I did put a work order in. I'm getting really good at work orders. The heating and air on a daily basis is an issue at our school, and there's just lots of work orders. It's getting close to 20 years old, so everything's hitting end of life that you would normally have in a school. Anyways, so they're coming into areas like this to try to do testing and work with kids. Our PE teacher's in a closet in the gym because there's not a space for her. And then we have our social work interns and our psychologist interns are just in closets too. And I just learned, hey, you can't do that. There's no water for, if there's a fire, you can't sprinkle those places. So you can't have kids in those spots where you're meeting with them. So that's another challenge for us. We have a wellness room, which is our one other room. When our kids right now we have 1 class that has 3 classes. Every other grade has 4. When that class leaves next year, then every grade will have 4 classes and they'll take our workroom. So then it'll make it so we have no workroom to do any small groups in the school, except for our wellness room, which we have at least 10% of our kids on a daily basis that use our wellness room. They're kids that have lost family, that are they're homeless. Their toxic stress is at a breaking point. They cannot function in a classroom without some type of break and wellness experience to get themselves regulated and back to where they can learn. So if we lost that wellness room, it would be extremely difficult to have these classrooms that have kids with so many challenges and not have something like that. So we do have that wellness room, but again, all of our portables and everything are housing our music and everything. So if we tried to bring that in, or I've heard talk that we didn't want portables. If we moved that in, that would be the one room we could move maybe music in, then we wouldn't have an art room or something like that. But yeah, so those are some of those challenges with overcrowding. If you want to go to the next. This is another, I went and I mapped out all the playgrounds in all of our elementary school. There's only one that's similar to ours, and that's Spring Creek, but they have over 200 less kids at their school than we have. So you have all these kids with all these challenges, and then you're putting them out in these playgrounds that are super packed. Ours is 2.5 acres. Every other school has 5 to 7 acres for kids to play on. And we have one playground that's small, our play area where you have the equipment. Every other school has at least 2 of those. Some have 3. A lot of them have dedicated fenced-in areas for their kindergarten, and we don't. And our kindergarten, our fence is like 3 feet high. It's by law, it's supposed to be 6 feet high. So that's another thing that would need to be replaced along with that. And I just feel like our kids need that. These kids need some space. If I'm not out there at recess, I spend the rest of my day dealing with fights and behavior issues that happen at the school because we're just right on top of each other. All right, let's see. Our parking lot, I talked about that. I talked about the kindergarten classes. You can go to the next one. Just again, our kids, they just need extra space. For what the evidence of education says to educate our kids, we need this space. We need to be able to protect them safely, emotionally, and then I feel like we can have better academic success if we can provide this type of environment for our kids. One last slide I think I have on there. Anyways, that's my plea to the board. If I feel like we have an opportunity where we could make a change, we could move this school to a place that could be safe, that could be in a neighborhood where you could protect these kids. I don't feel like it's safe. So that would be my plea on my behalf, on behalf of my parents, that we look and do whatever we can to move the school to a safe place. Questions?
I have one. How many classrooms per floor? Because you have 3 floors.
So there's about 8 on each, except for the middle floor with that workroom only has 1 less. So when we get to capacity, one of our grades will have to be on another floor. So you won't be able to have all the grades on the same floor. That's another challenge.
So are you counting the library as a classroom?
No. No.
Isn't that on the second floor?
Yeah. Yeah, the library I'm not counting the classroom.
And is it just the younger grade students that are runners, or do you have?
There's older kids, but I feel like as they get older, they know the road. But our kindergartners, when they're stressed out and they're not thinking, they just go straight for the road. I've chased kids for 18 years and caught many of them, but there's something in little kids' mind that when they're stressed out, they do not understand that, there's a car coming 35 miles an hour, you can't just go run straight into that road. And autism, mental health issues add to that challenge.
Other questions for Principal? You did such a great job. We don't have any questions. Very
That's
thorough.
all right. I feel like
I do have a question.
Yeah.
How much more square footage do we need? Like how big is?
I mean, it would be awesome if we could bring our music art inside and then have enough classrooms to still have a intervention room.
Okay.
That would be awesome if we could do that. If there's a way to build on there. My biggest concern
You're on
is
a limited size space anyway.
yeah. I mean, that would only take away. I've heard that they were planning when they built it to add another level there. I don't know if that's an option. Joey said he doesn't think it is. He doesn't think the school. They originally structured it to do that, but then they took those out when they decided not to add those rooms on the 3rd floor like they were going to.
I think it's like on the back area, like there you can.
Yeah. You can see where a couple classrooms should go up there, but they didn't put them in. So, yeah.
And if you lost one kind of class, the need for one classroom per grade, would you have the space to have the intervention spaces and to bring your music and art back?
So if you had just the 3, so two dual classes and an English class, then you would, yeah.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And my only other thing is it would be helpful to have some kind of fence that fences off that busy road. So if a kid goes out, they're hitting a fence that they would need to go around before they just. I mean, I timed it. It's 5 seconds for them to get out the door to be in the road. And that street never stops. It's always busy.
How are the cafeteria and gym spaces?
That's another issue. Is we're doing recess. I mean, we're running our gym programs why we're eating, so it's super loud in there. It's not adequate space. And I would say it's one of the smaller ones for our district, and so it's with the most kids. So it's a lot of what we're in is the smallest for one of the largest schools in the district. So we have 622 to 650. It fluctuates, and I think that's second in size to Lakeview. And Lakeview was designed, she told me today they have 5 classrooms for every grade. So they're able to have all their music and everything inside because they have four classes.
Remind me how many portables you have?
There's one portable, but it's divided. They put a wall through the middle. And so art's on one.
Art, 2 classrooms.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, Nicole, for being here and for representing your community as well. Oh, and what I was going to say is you present this picture. Well, today we're talking about a lot of negative stuff, but every person I've talked to, teacher, yourself, the PTA president, everyone at Timpanogos is so positive, and you guys are doing such great positive work for our students.
So if you want to see magic happen,
Yeah.
then come to Timpanogos.
Yes.
Because those classes I told you about, all of them made like 90% growth with their kids and met those targets in those kindergarten classes, which is just phenomenal.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
So,
And that
thank
6th
you.
grade teacher, I just looked at her numbers today. They just came out, I think, last night or the night before. 94% of her kids made above average or above growth in that class. So yeah,
You're doing great work. Thank you.
Okay, so Bonnie, will you put up the Dixon site survey data attachment? Not all the comments, but the PowerPoint-y looking thing.
Yes.
So I think it's important to kind of couch Principal Wolf's comments in perspective of what we've been talking about over the course of the last year, where we're trying to look at what would be the best use of the Dixon site. And last year when we went out and did community meetings and we got different pieces of feedback and looked at cost and looked at the needs of the district, kind of narrowed it into basically 3 different ideas. And so one was to possibly convert the Dixon Center into a type of CTE center. We'd have to be very strategic about what that looks like so you're not duplicating programs that are available at MTech or other things like that. But we talked about putting CAPS there. We've talked about putting East Bay Post High in that location, adult ed in that location, and it could be kind of the centralized space for those things. Option 2 would be to move Timpanogos Elementary to the Dixon site, and then you would retrofit Timpanogos Elementary to suit those specific needs. And then the third option, we talked about because of kind of the weird dynamics that sometimes, I shouldn't say weird dynamics, I should say sometimes the challenges that happen at a DLI school, like if you look at Canyon Crest Elementary where they have 1 English class and those class sizes are really small because most of the kids are in the DLI program, then is there an appetite to maybe look at having a DLI site where all of the students would be enrolled in DLI in a single location? So we put out this survey. It wasn't just people that attended the community meetings. I do believe that a majority of the people that responded are from the Dixon area. They're the ones that have the most vested interest in what happens here. And we did have 637 responses, which was actually more than what I thought we had when I was originally looking at this. So just under 50% of those that were surveyed felt that option 1 was a good option. And then I'll talk about some of the comments. I think there is kind of a view that this option could benefit the entire district in terms of the different programs and things that it houses there. And then option 2 is moving Timpanogos to the Dixon site. And then I just ran all of the comments through ChatGPT. I don't want anybody to think that I somehow created the summary, because I did not, and it did it in like 10 seconds and it was amazing. But there are, I think some of the individuals, and you heard this with Clint's comments about 5th West, people being really concerned about that street. I know I'm a person who speeds on that street, and so There's just a lot of needs for Timpanogos Elementary. There are some who argue that could this be resolved through boundary realignment, which kind of points to Lisa's question about if you're reducing the number of students that are there. Many individuals just want to make sure that we're being really fiscally responsible. They want to make sure that there's green space that's being salvaged, and then really present the options in a very neutral way. I think one of the things that we're seeing across the board, and you even see this in the individuals about DLI, is that people really value their neighborhood schools. That's an important piece to them. Even the parents that are sending their children to their neighborhood school are participating in the DLI program that's at their neighborhood school. And so their idea of having a DLI site was not appealing to them, even if transportation were provided. That certainly would break down a barrier, but you even saw that neighborhood school, we see in a lot of the feedback that we get from parents across the board, is pretty important. People just really want drop off and pick up to be, maybe there's a way to redesign Timpanogos Elementary. People had a lot to say, and you saw that with the comments that I attached so that you could actually go through and read those yourself. I wanted to make sure that the public had access to those, but wanted to provide a quick summary of that. And I think it's just an important conversation to have. I've had more people come back and start expressing a little bit of concern about what we don't want to make any kind of moves on a CTE center until we're really clear about what that would actually look like and what the interest level is, because you're starting to see some of these districts that have put in some money into that are a little concerned. Devin, has talked a little bit about that. And so we don't want to build something with this idea of, well, if we build it, they will come kind of thing. We want to make sure that they're banging on the doors to come and we build it in response to that. So, so that would also, I will just say this, one of the benefits of moving Timpanogos Elementary over to the Dixon site is it gives us a little more time to really identify what we would do with that particular site and the best use of that space. Would it provide us an opportunity to sell some of our other properties, or figure out ways in which we could utilize that property, those other properties more effectively? There's just a lot to the discussion, obviously. So I just wanted to share that with you, and then allow you to have a very open conversation and just talk about all the things and what you're hearing from your constituents, because I hear a lot from Timpanogos, but I don't. The only other community that I have heard, not extensively from, but a little bit from, is the Westridge community. That's like, please don't forget about our school and the needs that we have. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, as we've talked about Westridge, that would not be necessarily a complete rebuild. That would be a remodel of the school to get it to where we need it to be, so not quite as expensive in that realm. But that neighborhood definitely does not want to be forgotten in the process, which we understand completely. So,
all right,
questions,
I'm gonna open it up for discussion. Gina, I'm going to pick on you since Dixon site and Timpanogos are in your area. I would love to hear what you're hearing from the community over there.
So I've been hearing, so it seems to be that most of the people in the community who no longer have children in the school system want to see the CTE center there. But then after having a conversation with me, this is from when we had those meetings last year all the way up until now, we talk about some of the issues that Timpanogos is facing. They're like, well, we'd actually be fine either way as long as it's utilized correctly. Like as long as there's a school or something educational there. The parents who have children there, maybe one or two that I've spoken to over the years don't want it to move. Most of them want it moved for all of the reasons that Principal Wolf outlined. And I will tell you that is it now my time to do my editorial comments?
We're having a discussion,
okay.
so yeah.
I was leaning toward doing the CTE school there, and especially after I saw that Timpanogos wasn't actually in the yellow or whatever for capacity, blah, blah, blah. But then I went in and looked at the school. I've been in a few times. And because I thought, well, maybe we could just retrofit the school for this, but can't. Unless you add a whole wing on, unless you add, like, I don't see how you're going to change those closets with electrical things in them into a viable, good learning environment for the kids. The only way to do it is to actually expand the school, and I don't know how much that will cost. And so as I've
Take all your playground space, Twizzle Rages.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And the playgrounds are, I pass there every day, multiple times per day, and it's, especially because they're missing one piece. It's very crowded, and so that's kind of the feedback that I've gotten. Everybody is very grateful that we're at least paying attention to it, because, and that I've had a few people say to me recently, the district made promises and they're going back and looking at ever since our board meetings were televised, and they're looking at the things that different board members have said. I don't know if they're going to bring it and say, this person said this and this, but there were, and I don't remember what the promises were. So there were a lot of
previous board.
Promises
for the
yes.
Dixon site, or just
for the Dixon site, for the Dixon site,
okay,
and the Timpanogos site. I actually
Okay.
I didn't dig into that much more. I didn't want to dig into it more, but yeah. So yeah, the end.
The fear that I think that I've heard when going to Dixon meetings before I was on the board from neighbors there, they just didn't want it to be sold.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think maybe that's the promise that they're maybe referring
Could
to.
be.
Could be. I don't
Could
know.
be.
That we were going to sell it.
And I don't.
Right.
I've told everybody in my discussion, there's two very centrally located pieces of property that are valuable to the district, and so I have had some conversations with people about CTE things where it would be beneficial to have the CTE building right next to the bus stop for
Adult ed.
for adult ed and others, and East Bay Coast High,
High.
just
Yeah,
people
exactly.
who are like in
Learning how to-
wheelchairs, and it's easier for them to get there than it would be for them to get. They could get down to the Dixon
Right.
site, but it would be harder for them to get to the Dixon site, and it's right there on that thoroughfare. So I heard that as well.
I think go ahead, Meg.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think some of the concerns can be addressed through our boundaries, right? Like having closets where we have to fit people. I mean, we can say we're going to adjust so there's fewer students who go there. However, I'm not saying I think that's the solution.
Right.
But I do think, number one, people can still choose where they want to go. So, and a lot of people really like the programs, the DLI that are there at the school. But it does not help with the size of the playground. That's always been an issue. Even since before I was on the board and I was just involved at the PTA level, I was hearing about that. I heard about how when they did build the school 20 plus years ago, that they were very cheap in the materials and the quality, and we're seeing that. So there's a lot to address there if we do and I know we're going to have members of the public that say, why would you move it? The school's really not that old. Make do with
I've
what
heard
you
that as
have,
well.
right? So I think we do need to be very thoughtful about if we are going to consider moving it. I mean, are there so many constraints that we can't overcome at the site that make more sense to move it? And I think Principal Wolf did a good job explaining a lot of the safety. It really does concern me, the safety of our runners and all of our students on that big, busy intersection, that being back in a neighborhood makes more sense for that alone. So, Meg, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Timpanogos has, for the last almost 20 years, right, done a lot of great work in that building, and I think they can continue doing that if need be, right? I think I am looking at this as there is this opportunity to move it, and if we do something different with Dixon, that opportunity is gone, right? I think that's kind of how I am approaching this and considering it and thinking of all the benefits that will come for that school community on the Dixon site as opposed to the site it's currently on. Because yeah, just from my own experience with kids, yes, the playground is so small and so limiting for all. I mean, the kindergarten, everyone uses that. Kindergarten all the way to 6th grade, that one space. And the field isn't always playable and stuff. But I guess I also want to acknowledge there are people in the area who have been there for a long time who, when they hear the concern about Fifth West, they do say, well, it actually hasn't, in their opinion, that hasn't really been a big problem. If that's the only reason we're moving it is for Fifth West, you know, are there other things we can do to address what the concerns may be outside of the school, in the school? That is something I have heard. Yeah, I think I am not convinced that changing boundaries will address the space constraints in the building. So, I mean, I think, what is it? It's like 69,000 square feet, where, you know, our other elementary schools are 80,000 square feet. About, right? Is that
Between
correct?
75 and 80.
Yeah. So, and, you know, like Principal just said, Ruby started in kindergarten, and it always has had above 600 students at the school. Since that. Anyway, I don't know if that is helpful, but, yeah.
Okay, other thoughts? Oh, sorry, were you done?
I did want to add, because I had thought the same thing Wendy shared, that I do think another benefit of moving the elementary school is that solves some concerns we're having with the current site for Timpanogos, but also gives more time to decide what are the problems or the things we need to address within the entire district and programming, that we can have more time to really hone in on what those needs are before building something that is maybe not quite hitting the mark.
Before Gina goes, anyone who hasn't had a chance to go ahead, Melanie.
So I have a question for Kevin. So I brought this up at the PT meeting at Rock Canyon today, just to say, hey, there's questions, you know, because this will affect them as well, you know. How much are we looking at, and when would we do the next bond to pay for something like this?
Great question. That will depend. What I really want to make sure is that we have a good plan and a hard bid before we go out and do a bond. Just because there's way too many variables and inflation that has kind of burned us on several of our other pieces that we've done over the years. So timing wise, that would really be up to the board on how soon we want it to start, but probably no sooner than 2 or 3 years, because we need some really good time to design. But it could be sooner. We're just getting ready to issue the bonds this month for Timpview, and so it will just depend on what the board wants to do with the impact of another bond adding on top of that.
Because we have Provo Peaks is falling off, right?
Provo Peaks is falling off this year. This year is when we make the large payment for the debt. That's only $6.5 million. Next year, refunding of the bond that built, to go back far enough, a lot of the seismic upgrades that we did about 20 years ago. And then the next one doesn't fall off until 2035. And that was when we did the Provo High. Yep.
That's my question. Go ahead.
Just to kind of add to that, one thing I've been thinking about as I've been trying to figure this out in my own head is, I don't believe that the school the way it is will be adequate for students, especially with the population that he was talking about. So if we choose not to move the school, which if that's what we decide, then we'll move forward and it'll be okay. But how much is it going to cost us? And this is a future, right? I'm not asking for an answer now, but I would like to know how much it's going to cost us to retrofit the school to fit the population. And I really do think this has a lot to do with the fact that it was built so cheaply, which is great and not great all at the same time, but it was built so cheaply that it's difficult to make anything work in there. So that's something before we were to make a final decision, I would love to at least kind of, for us to consider how much is it going to cost to build onto the school so that we can have no portables, right? We want to get rid of the portable and have all the kids in the school, and then also have spaces for interventions without displacing. Well, there's really no displacing because there's not enough room. So something that I've been thinking about.
I think that's an important point that you're bringing up, Gina, because I've heard people say, well, if we move Timpanogos over to the Dixon site, then not only are you paying for the rebuild of an elementary school, but also for the retrofitting of the Timpanogos site, but you're going to have to retrofit the Timpanogos site anyway, I think is the point that Clint was trying to show, and do some upgrades and some things to make it more doable and livable and manageable for students. So I don't know that the savings on that is going to be so significant. It'll be some.
It will be, but you're also having to deal with still a small site.
Yep,
So
that's
you will
right.
always have the problem with the green space not being large enough for the number of kids that are there. So when you're looking at it from both directions, there might be a small savings, but you're not gaining anything. And if
With
we
those.
add on, you're actually losing some of that green space.
Go ahead, Lisa. So I'll just share a few comments that have come to me in the last week, and maybe someone here can just address or kind of speak to them a little. The first one, I've had a couple of people ask me about, we've just studied boundaries and we're looking at how we're using buildings, and a perception is that, there are buildings with capacity in our district, and so rather than spend money, people are wondering, could we, realign boundaries in a way that allows a much less expensive set of solutions. So maybe speak to, when I think about that idea that there are schools, the school I think of with space would be Franklin, right? Someone address that's better at this than I am, just some of the challenges of trying to do that kind of boundary allocation. And there's quite a big distance between these schools, right? And so
Not that much distance.
So, but if someone wants to address that, I think that would be helpful for people to hear. What would get in the way of that, or why would that not seem like a good solution? I can hear that we still have the green space issue around playgrounds and some of the retrofitting and upgrades, but right now people are have an awareness of how can we cut costs in general, and how can we talk about our spending and using our taxpayers' dollars carefully. And so part of that is using them to solve the problems and meet the needs of our kids, right, and keep them safe in school, etc. So that's one thing that came to me. And then the other thing that I heard in the last month from only 3 families, but 3 families were talking to me about pulling their kids out of a neighborhood school because the DLI program, because their kids were not in DLI, and that felt problematic. And I don't know if, as we're looking about and talking about that, a DLI magnet maybe doesn't solve that because of the need people have to be in a neighborhood school and want that. But for the families who feel adversely impacted by not being in that DLI, are there some neighborhood solutions where we have 2 neighborhood schools near each other? I don't know, but that is a concern for families, and I figure if 3 people have talked to me, there are more than 3 with this experience who are just feeling like it's really hard if you're not in that DLI program to feel like your child's needs are being met in the same way, and they're looking to either take them somewhere outside or, depending on the family and what their resources are, solve that. And with these families, I know, I think most of them have choice to Rock Canyon, which I'm so grateful we have that option, right, that's not too far. But anyway, those are just the things that I'm hearing.
I have an idea. We combine Timpanogos and Franklin. Timpanogos becomes the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade building. Franklin becomes the preschool, the 3rd grade building. Then all those preschool kids who don't go to Timpanogos because they have to go to Provo Peaks can go to Franklin now. If we need to expand the DLI program, there might be space, because now 6th grade is on one level, 5th grade is one level, 4th grade is on one level. You don't have to deal with the younger grades. Going out to 5th grade, to 5th West, they're enclosed into the playground at Franklin, which is already enclosed. If anybody has a better idea, please come up with it. but
I guess my only, I'm curious if families would feel like it would be our only 2 schools in the district that are structured that way. Like,
Yeah.
will there be challenges of like, well, I want my 1st grader to be where my 5th grader is, you know, kind of, I don't,
And
those
I-
would just be hurdles you'd maybe have to kind of over time.
And I know
You I don't
families
think
who
they're-
live in the Franklin neighborhood who want to be in the Spanish DLI, but they don't want to leave Franklin, and I'm like, well, this would help that, solve that problem. And
I think my concern, if I'm speaking as a parent, I would hate that I had a 2nd grader at one site and a 5th grader at a different site, that could, especially if I'm a working parent and now I'm trying to work, I don't know, I feel like that could
Especially
create
if your
some-
younger one has the further walk or
Yeah, it
whatever,
could be,
right?
anyway,
It's
I think it's an
something
interesting idea.
to ponder, but
Just an idea to piggyback on. It's very, if we were to build a bigger Timpanogos site, then like the Orem schools are all going to 1,000 kids
in their elementaries.
in their elementaries. Yes, that's,
Yeah.
Helping
that-
send
and
another
that's
way.
how that they're able to reduce like admin and things like that. So it's an idea to combine Franklin and Timpanogos together in a bigger site.
that was another idea I had.
But-
One big giant school that you combine 2, and then you can make Timpanogos and Franklin. One is the East Bay Post High, one's adult ed. Adult ed isn't portable next to Independence.
I think maybe, I don't know if we've all received it, but there was some feedback about that idea, just in that you are combining, you know, Franklin and Timpanogos are 2 of our most highly impacted communities, and what does that look like in all one community as opposed to kind of spreading out, addressing the unique needs of both those communities? That could be a challenge, right, to combining,
Yeah.
right, is you're combining a lot of high needs.
You worry about
And more of those students in one place, right?
walkability too for that population is usually, that seems to be very important, right? That our kids can walk to the schools, combine all that into one. I think that makes that harder. Although I do love that we're throwing out different ideas to at least consider, right? Yeah, Jean.
I was just, I've not thrown out that idea, but I've said, because people are like, I don't want any more taxes, I want to. So I've said, well, we can do big schools like Alpine has done, and they have, I said, at one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but at one point, Vineyard had 1,600 elementary students. So I said, so the overall cost, and everybody I've talked to has said, no, we do not, we want to keep neighborhood schools. And then I tell them neighborhood schools are more expensive to run. And so I think we have to do some education for people to help them understand that neighborhood schools, yeah, there's a trade. I mean, we could do it that way. I don't prefer it that way, but I'm also not every taxpayer. So if we need to look at that, but every time I brought it up, there's been like almost anger when I bring that up. That's not how we want to do things. So maybe, I don't know how to educate and help people understand that. But, yeah, I do, and I agree. Timpanogos and Franklin are kind of close together, but you've got Center Street in between them.
Yeah.
And
Big
that is,
a very big difference.
yeah, that's a big deal, so.
Emily and Rachel, we haven't heard from you. Do you guys have any thoughts about the overall discussion here?
Out of the 3 options, I like building a new Timpanogos. If I was voting on it, that's what I would vote for.
I would say, yeah, I agree. I'd rather have a better Timpanogos and focus on that green space, especially if from years past it's always been an issue and we've never been able to fully address it up until this point. And that area being near that 500 West, just being so dangerous, and just having that fence, making sure that's safety and green space. And even how he was talking about how that portable seems pretty moldy and smelly, just even those little safety things, or like the comfort of our students, I think is most important for us.
Okay. So I guess the next question is, what do we need to know or do to then be able to move forward on making a decision?
mean, I don't have the answer, but what's mulling in my head is where are things gonna shake out with our boundary study that will it significantly impact moving to Timpanogos? Maybe not though, because of the constraints. I think in my mind, even changing boundaries, that school still has constraints that are still going to be problematic for any population that's in the school. And in that community, right? And the needs that those kids have.
Pretty sure parents
So
of kids in other areas would not be happy to have their child in a place with a sign that says whatever it was that he showed with the electrical boxes. Yeah, so it's like, yes, for this population, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just saying, I think other areas, if their children were being pulled out there for any reason, that they might not be happy about it. Yeah.
So I would just ask then, do we want to try to flesh out some of these other suggestions and ideas? Like, is there enough interest in those to find out a little bit more around what that would look like and how people would feel about that? To look into, you know, in terms of costs, like, is that, we won't know numbers or plans, but like, can we see the impact financially and have some view of a differential there? Or if the majority of the board is not really interested in fleshing those out, then maybe we have that conversation now so that we then move forward with a clearer direction of where we're headed.
Yeah, they need direction because things are just on hold.
Yeah.
Good.
That's a great question. Do we want more information about any of those extra ideas?
What information specifically do you want about that?
Is it even possible?
It's always possible. What more specifically do you want about that?
Well, I think Lisa just talked about financially the impact. And I would be curious if we're going to look at either of those options. Just what does educational research tell us about what those options, like if there have been successful models where they've done this split K3, 4, 6, what are basically the pros and the cons, right? Because we can make a decision only based on financials that could look very different than a decision based on, we want a successful education for our students, we want safety, right? There's all these different factors. And so I think we've got to, in any decision, look at all of those and then decide what are the most important of all those factors to us in the decision, and where do the pros line up the best for what's the most important to us, right? And I'm guessing with this idea, Terry, we would bus a lot of the younger kids, right? So
the transportation would be an additional cost because we need to buy a few.
My kids did a split school like this, so in Boston I had them at lots of different schools at once. It wasn't ideal in my view in terms of sending your kids to a neighborhood school where they travel together at least for a few more years, but also I think that was their creative way of addressing some of their space constraints, and I didn't feel educationally, this is one anecdotal piece of data, that, we made academic trade-offs. In fact, there were some advantages, but when I first learned I'd send a 5th grader to a middle school, I was having a heart attack. I admit I was pretty upset about that, but then they kept them as a lower school and an upper school, and they had 5, 6 on one floor and 7, 8, and they never really almost knew the other kids were in the building, and they did such a beautiful job with the cohorts and the space and the collaboration of their teachers that it was really a lovely experience. But I understand that there will be parents who are that is a huge adjustment, from a K6 neighborhood school model. And I do think in Provo we're hearing this about DLI, even though we all know there are some inherent challenges with our neighborhood DLI modeling, and every school that I've been to and people I've talked to that teach there and our administrators there will share some of the challenges they face from that model. But when we ask the public about it, I feel like we consistently hear from the public that they want, the majority of them, DLI in their neighborhood schools. They really do, right? And so,
except for I've heard it opposite.
Well, I have heard opposite also
So
from
I'm
families,
just
but I'm
saying,
just saying when we do those surveys that
you know, have gone out. That is kind of how the data has come in general. So, you know, I don't know.
So can I ask a clarifying
Yeah.
question? If you separate the K3 and the 4-6, is that in the current Timpanogos or building a new one?
Current Timpanogos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Without the portable.
Right.
Without portables.
So, I will get you more definitive research, but every time a child has a transition from one school to another, there is a significant adjustment that happens with kids. We know that. So that is the advantage of a K through 6 elementary school, is that you're really limited. For 7 years, they can be in the same location, kind of, right? As long as the parents are staying in that particular area. So that would be one concern that I would have. We know that the most important thing is about, do we have quality teachers in front of students? Do we have good administrators? Do we have good parental support? Those are going to be the key pieces that are going to help a student be successful. But I will also say having highly impacted schools with large numbers creates a series of challenges. I mean, imagine Franklin Elementary with 600 students. That would be, you know, the reason that Franklin Elementary is a highly impacted school and it can be manageable is because it has a small population. And so if you did move and separate those two, you're balancing that, which I think is what your desire is there, Terry. And I do think I'm from my own personal perspective, the idea of an elementary school that's 1,000 students is, we have school districts that have passed policies that won't even allow a high school to go over 1,500 because they recognize that large schools is where kids get lost. So I have some real concerns about an elementary school starting to rise to those kinds of numbers. Even if that's efficient, that's not going to produce the educational outcomes that I believe that we're seeking. And what we hear consistently from parents of charter school students is, I want to be in a school that's smaller, I want smaller class sizes, I want my kid to be seen. The larger the school is, the more difficult that becomes. So. But I'll produce some official research on all of that for you to digest.
I'm just curious if any of Cabinet who's here tonight has any other thoughts to add.
I'm sure they have thoughts.
To any of that?
Please add them.
Is it worth us considering some of these other options, or are there enough things that are concerning to you that we shouldn't even start to look at that? Is that a waste of our time to go down that route?
I think splitting schools by grade level I would not recommend that at all in regard to 3rd, 4th, or 6th, though it might produce some efficiency. Superintendent Dow has shared not just the research, but the PR behind that we would be navigating would be really difficult. Additional transportation costs back and forth would also be a factor. The one consideration that we talked about was moving Timpanogos. One other opportunity might be to adjust boundaries to reduce the number of students at Timpanogos. There are some, but the only 2 schools that could take kids that are within a reasonable distance are Westridge and Franklin. And making Franklin more highly impacted might not be the wisest thing, though there are 6 available classrooms at Westridge.
Jason?
I think we talked a lot about the safety at the current Timpanogos site, and I think that is one of those things that is kind of top of the list of how do we solve that, right? Because I do think you have the Dixon site, and we want to do something great with the Dixon site, but what's happening right now at Timpanogos? And I think Principal Wolf did a great job of painting that picture. And as he mentioned, maintenance has said to them many times, there's all these projects that are on hold because we don't want to spend money and then go tear it back out. So, you know, timing-wise, I think there is a need to have something done for the current Timpanogos.
Definitely. When does Boys and Girls Club move out of the current site?
They're contracted through June 2026, but and I haven't heard about how their building's going. They originally asked through December of 2025, but I know that construction moves a little slower than what everybody hopes it does, so we've signed it through June of 2026.
So would we consider after June 2026 to tear down the building at that point, or?
Can I give my permission? Or I mean, I would say yes. At that point, we would tear it down so we could start the design process of a new build a little bit easier and decrease the amount of utilities, maintenance work needed, supervision of, you know, the ice removal, snow removal. There's a lot of reasons why that building would need to come down. But that's my opinion. It's not necessarily what would happen, but that my opinion would be it still costs quite a bit of money utility-wise to run that school. And if we still need to have somebody there and somebody watching it to make sure that things are taken care of, and there's always a desire to use it if it's there, and there's areas of the school that the reason we closed it was because it wasn't safe. And so it's been great to use for Tempview Kitchen. They've done an incredible job getting kids fed at Tempview since we closed the cafeteria, and it's been a great opportunity to serve our kids with Boys and Girls Club as their building's being helped. But the liability of it is significant.
What are we thinking as far as timeline for making a decision? Like, what are we really, we need to have a deadline, I think, because we could talk about this forever.
Yes, I agree.
And never make a
That's the
decision.
number one thing I hear from people. What are you going to do for Dixon? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's make a decision.
At all-day board meeting, do you think we could decide about this? Or is that not possible? I mean, the people that I've talked to, they all think that we should move to Pinocchio, and they live in the Westridge boundary. I haven't heard anyone boo-hoo about, well, what about Westridge? But those are the people I'm talking to. There probably are people that are like boo-hoo about Westridge, but they can wait.
Going along with what she's saying, I think you were asking like what information do you guys need? I would like to see, like, if it's a $50 million bond we're looking at to build the school, what is that impact going to be in like 2 or 3 years? Or is that going to be, do you know what I'm saying?
That would be helpful.
And really, the only way to get a really good idea is to hire an architect and start the design.
I mean, I know, but I'm saying around 50 million.
We could,
you know
yeah,
what?
assume it's gonna be around that.
Yes,
Right.
there's assumption that's around that number.
I mean, we could get a pretty good guess, but you know, between the beginning of when we did Tempview to where we are at Tempview now, we're talking about a $250 difference in price per square foot. So it's a guess. We could get a guess.
We could get a guess to at least help us.
I can get a guess.
Because that's another consideration, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the inflation between 2019 and 2024 was pretty significant. There's the last few schools that have been built up in Salt Lake have been right around $500 a square foot. And
well, it wasn't like Sunset View and Rock Canyon were built for $13 million each. And now what were we at with what's that,
40 million, but that was with the wall as well.
So 30 without the wall.
Yeah, ish.
So to show you
right. So before, you know, when we put money into the building reserve years ago, it was for the rebuild of an elementary school, so we didn't have to do a bond. And that's another option to look at, is some of the funding that we currently have, but that also might need to be used based on where we get the bid for Tempview. Once we get that, because that's not something I want to bond for again. We want to just do what we have and get that building built.
But so maybe could we, since we're way over time for today, continue this part of the discussion at our all-day meeting?
Yep.
And yes, and then
in
in the
some
meantime, if every board member can think about, are you ready to move forward towards a decision, like make a decision soon, or what other things do we need to talk about, and let Gina and I know that, and then we can make a plan for when we would make a decision.
So, and then that would also be, do you want a cost for a CTE center or an elementary school? Because those costs will be different. Yeah. So,
But I agree with Wendy with talking about building the CTE center. Are we building it to meet our needs, or are we building it?
if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, and that worries me.
Well, we have
It
current
worries me
needs
too.
that need space.
Yes.
Adult ed.
We have our
English,
ESL,
ESL.
East Bay Post High.
Yes.
Yes.
Could our space without a tremendous amount of money, if we moved Timpanogos, be used for that? Or is that, even if we were to say like, we're gonna do this while we wait to decide, like, I'm just concerned, I guess, about, could we just use that space effectively though for those needs?
At Timpanogos
At
Elementary?
Timpanogos,
Yes,
with
I think so.
understanding
I don't-
some of the costs that maintenance is waiting on?
That should be part
Or
of it.
would that be an expense, and then if we decided we actually do wanna use this for CAPS and some of these CTE things, then now we're looking at an I guess I'd love to have a really clear plan before we decide how we're paying for this if possible, only because I think it's hard to keep asking for money for each piece of this without a really strategic vision of what we're doing and why.
Well, and I think you could just start with CAPS, East Bay Post High. We have talked about adult ed, ESL, a community center. Possibly we've talked about doing, if we did do a teaching as an education strand and did a daycare there, because we already have that set up, that could all be housed there, and I don't think it would take a lot to retrofit that building. We would still have to do those maintenance costs, but we're gonna do that
For sure,
anyway, because
yeah.
we're not offloading this building,
Right.
So those costs would still be in place anyway. So and that space is big enough to hold all of that.
So in my mind, that cost differential then is less, because you would be building a building if you built a CTE center. So I'm just saying, like, that just helps me understand that it's a financially responsible thing to do, besides being most likely the right thing from my perspective to do for our students, to consider rebuilding Timpanogos.
I used to think it was a little bit different in the sense of if you just left Timpanogos, but as you're starting to look at all of the ways in which it would have to be retrofitted, that building's gonna have to be retrofitted and updated anyway. So it's easier, I think, to do that and then get the right space that you need for an elementary school, which is where a majority of your kids are going to be. And even in talking to Nate Edelson about East Bay Post High, like the location of where it is works so well with the different resources that he has available. I mean, there was just a lot of excitement that came.
They were on the Timpanogos site?
At the Timpanogos site.
And to your point, Lisa, right, those are other needs we currently have
Yes.
to house these other programs that this new, potentially a new elementary then also addresses those other needs in a space that can be well utilized, right?
Yep.
That's helpful, I haven't.
And there's things too, as you look at, like, like you said, we need to talk about this in all day board meeting, but if you look at Grandview, you can think about Grandview and the little that we have housed there now could also be moved to Timpanogos, and then are there possibilities of figuring out, do we sell that property, what do we do with that property, and so there can be some income that comes in to offset that, to help alleviate that cost. We need to be looking at those things as options as well. Now,
Okay.
No, I think that's great.
Okay, great discussion, everybody. Okay, let's move on to item number 7, new school year class sizes, teacher allocation. We just want to kind of get an update where we are with all of that, and if we hit our projections, if we're seeing some trends that are surprising, or if we need to move people around.
So, a couple of.
I thought you were looking at me like I was going to give this presentation and I about have a heart attack.
Well, I realized all of a sudden that we had to talk about who was going to do this.
Okay, well, I'm really glad it's you.
But I'm totally fine. I'm gonna share this screen if that's okay.
You got it, Wendy.
Wendy and I work really well together, but we haven't seen much bunch of each other over the last couple of days. We've been pretty busy. So I'm just going to show you what we look at. So our projections are pretty close. There's a couple of schools that have dropped below what we were expecting. Westridge, Spring Creek, Wasatch. Wasatch was up. Not by a ton.
Enrollment was up.
Wait, are these schools you're listing going up or down from what you've expected?
There
Sorry,
are schools that have gone down, so
Yeah.
that are
Westridge?
lower than what we
Enrollment's lower.
projected.
Spring Creek.
And you know what? I'm going to bring up my projections while I'm thinking about this, just so we can compare a couple of that. Only because I want to make sure I give you correct information, because this could be watched later. So, and let me go and pull one more, because this is a little bit more succinct allocation before. So the way that we do all of our allocations is based on what the projected enrollment is. So you can see right now, Amelia Earhart Elementary was projected at 377, and if we pull up their current enrollment, we're at 377. So we nailed a couple of the schools right on, or within just a couple of trips. But you can see.
But there, I know at Amelia, their kindergarten was under.
Correct.
But their
absolutely.
second grade was over.
Correct.
So, it kind of balanced out.
This is total enrollment. This is not necessarily grade level. Grade level is a different animal because you just can't project kindergarten as well as you used to. There used to be a really easy way to do it every other year. You'd get a spike. But that, I mean,
that's kind of funny.
But it is true. We could, every other year we could project that there's going to be an increase in enrollment. The last couple of years has been the first couple of years where Utah County's net migration, you know, with birth and death and moving has been negative. So we've hit a little bit of a dearth, I guess, for lack of a better word. But so you can look at Westridge we projected 600, and when you go to Westridge, they're at 545. So they're about 55 kids less than what we had projected at the beginning of the year, but this is the lowest they've been for a little bit. And you can see that kindergarten and first grade are a little bit lower than the rest of the grades. So when you look at the bars, this is what Jared and I look at a lot over the first few weeks of school to see, because it has the class size of every single class in the school. And so we can look and see if there are problem pockets where, you know, if we have a couple of grades not at this school. Let's bring up Timpanogos just so we can show you one of the things that we did. So you can see their 4th grade DLI has 30 kids in each class. So when there's a little bit of a narrative out there saying our DLI classes are the lowest, in a lot of cases that in some schools that is not the case. So we put an aide in this 4th grade DLI to be able to split between the two teachers to be able to provide some prep time.
Is that the grade that has 3 classes?
No, well, there's 2 DLI classes and then
one
2
English
English classes. So
Fifth
5th
grade,
grade
okay.
is the one that has the 2 DLI and one English.
First grade is large as well, that age is shared.
Yeah, those first grade classes are.
Correct. Yes, you're right. So 1st grade is also at 30 kids per in the DLI. So there's the aid that's shared between those so that they've got some time to prep. Jared, you're welcome to pipe up as often as you would like. So this is really what we look at, and so at the beginning of the year I take a look. So I don't really do a lot of budget adjustments until the October 1 number is hit, because that's where we're funded. Once we get that October 1st, then I can adjust the school budgets to be so it's everybody's getting the same, which is a big deal when you talk about some of the federal grants, because they want there to be parity between all schools, so that you can say you're not shoring Title I schools because they're given additional revenue in other areas.
Can I ask you a question? On the
Of
first grade
course.
non-DLA class right now, so you have 18
So
in
there's
each class.
18 in each one. So way too many to put in one class. You can't have
Right.
36 first graders.
No, right.
But when you're looking at efficiency in a district, we budget based on 27.5 kids per class. But when you're looking at some of them, you do have
Right.
to break it up.
Right.
And then it's
Okay.
more expensive. When you're looking at price per student, it's going to be more expensive at a school like this where there's smaller class sizes than it is at some of the
Yeah,
other
and
schools.
second grade, same thing, right? That's a small little class.
Correct. So second grade is a little bit smaller. You have 15 and 17.
So you mentioned Westridge and Spring Creek had fewer.
So we could go through each one. I cannot read that. There's about 4 schools that are lower. Spring Creek was a little bit lower. We had them projected at 407. They're at 392. So,
Okay.
we're within, the Westridge is the biggest difference.
Okay.
Most of them are within 10 to 15 kids either way.
So are we looking at the need to move teacher allocations because of that?
That's a big difference.
That's not something, it's something that would be, I don't know. I'm not an educator, so I really am not the right one to answer the question, but I can give you my financial perspective.
Well, or Jason.
And I'll let Jason. That's great.
So Jared and I did meet with every one of the principals and go through each of these different concerns. And Terry brought up earlier, Amelia Earhart had a really large second grade and a fairly small kinder. We did make a move there in building where a kinder teacher moved to second grade to lower the class size and make it more doable. And like Devin is pointing out in the overall FTE numbers, the school, there are only a few schools that are down. The schools that would be up are okay with the number of students in their classes. They're not having concerns of needing support. And that would be our reason for moving someone right now, because they have a job. We wouldn't want to move them and say we don't have a position.
Right.
Because the spread over the difference is over grades. It's not over one grade. So if it was 15 kids in one grade, Jason would address that by possibly adding a teacher or moving one within the school.
Well, one of the things too, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Daryl and Jason, with Shoreline, but you can't take an elementary teacher and move them into a middle school, right? And so it's like we have budgeted overall for FTE, but there are restrictions that happen because of certifications and what that looks like. It gets really complicated really quickly. So it isn't just a numbers situation that we're looking at.
And when you're talking secondary, we had projected 849 for Shoreline, and that Shoreline is 947 or anyway. So, but the way that they got creative, they said they didn't necessarily want another teacher. They wanted some aides, some 29-hour aides to be able to help in the math, the core classes, so that they could do smaller groups with the kids. So. I mean, it's a pretty big moving target for those first 10 days of school, and so we were able to place some aides in the classes that were really large. But we worked together pretty closely to make sure that those were taken care of, and the principals let Jared and Jason and Daryl know if there's a significant issue.
So what's the total enrollment so far?
As of this morning, it's 13,111 of K-12, I believe. I can tell you because I just at 13,111 at the schools. This is overall. Oh, 921 is off by 20. But
So can you click on Canyon Crest for us?
oh, let me duplicate this so that we have to go back to the total enrollment. And Canyon Crest is one of those schools that are heavy in DLI but are light in English. English, so.
Yeah, so what happens, like, I don't know if I'm on the right dashboard right now, but mine says 9 students in the English first grade class.
Correct. But there's only one
Right.
English
So
class
what-
round.
So yeah.
9 students.
You have 9 students in a class.
You
That's real.
could combine if you ended up with 9 students in first
and
grade and
second.
second grade,
Because Rock
and do a
Canyon does
split
that.
and do
Yeah,
a
Rock
split
Canyon
class.
does
Correct, and doing a first-third split, which is what you'd have to do, isn't really doable.
And there are
because we're
26 in the second grade
Yeah,
class,
that's
so
why
that's
they
also
can't do
not
that, yeah.
doable.
Correct. So, I mean, you're looking
Okay.
at a lot of
Yeah.
different things, but you have to have a first grade
Right.
teacher
No,
that's
I
English, so.
understand, yeah.
And there's not enough room in the second grade class.
Some
to
of the
really-
Edgemont English speaking kids to, hey, look at this good opportunity, small class size, choice over.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions for today?
I think I want to point out to this, and I am paying attention to time because I only have till 6:05 to go over policies. I'm totally going to make it. But what's interesting about this is at the parent advisory committee, when the parents were talking about DLI, they realized that every DLI community is very unique.
Yes.
Because what the Canyon Crest parents were saying was happening, and then the Lakeview parents were like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Like, we don't have this problem, like our classes are busting at this, you know, there was just a different view. And they were like, this was so helpful because what seems like a solution for DLI is just a solution for this school, not for the entire DLI community. And I thought that was really good that they were able to see that perspective. And then they even saw that with Wasatch and Edgemont as well. There's a difference there.
But it is something to think about when we have, for example, with Canyon Crest and Edgemont. And I know how much people love those schools, so I'm not trying to upset my constituents right now. But, you know, Edgemont's first grade class is 10 students. And Canyon Crest is 9, right? And those schools are very close together. And actually, almost, I would say mostly almost walkable between them, unless you're busing already to one. And so, as we're thinking about solutions in schools and things, we just have to be aware that there might need to be some different solutions for different sets of schools, even within this district, to address some of these things. All right, thank you for the updates. Let's go ahead and move on to policy. We'll start with our second readings, which will be up for a vote today at our business meeting.
Right. So I attached later a policy summary. It's the same document for both the second and third, the first and second readings. I just put it into one, but I wanted it to be there twice. So we'll start with policy 1008. This is a second reading. This one's a pretty easy one. We just had the update about that not only are individuals taking the constitutional oath, but they're also signing the oath, and then we're registering that signed oath with the business administrator. So there wasn't much discussion or concern about this particular thing. It has been available for public comment. We did forget to include this policy on the business agenda last time, so it is on the business agenda. Any questions on 1008? Sweet, let's talk about 1103, which is vacancies on the board. This is the one that has the awesome phrase between the lines 23 and 28. Yeah. So we took this back to policy committee, and Meg did her magic with some chat GPT, and we came up with a couple of options. So you'll look at the first option there.
Way to call me out. What if they're
Sorry, I know. Meg just came up with these two options. Let me correct myself. And so one was if a vacancy or resignation occurs at least 14 days before the filing deadline and at least 2 years will remain in the term after the first Monday in January following the next school board election, the board appoints an interim member until that January. Then the seat is filled by election for a 2-year term. So we took this one sentence and broke it into 2 sentences. This one kind of created some bullet points. And so if both conditions are met, so the vacancy or resignation occurs at least 14 days before the filing deadline, and at least 2 years will remain in the term after the first Monday in January following the next school board election, then the board shall appoint an interim member until that January, and the seat shall be elected for a 2-year term. I don't know if either of those feel
Terry, you were the one that brought this up before about how confusing it was, and we all agree that it's extremely confusing. We know what to do in this situation. We're just not sure that the language actually reflects what we know we're supposed to do. And so if you were...
I think option 2 is better.
I think
It's
option
more
2 too.
organized.
Okay.
I like it
Feels
as
more
well.
understandable. It's broken up better.
Yeah.
It's better for your
I
eyes.
agree. Better for your eyes. I love it.
Oh, policy for your eyes.
Policy for your eyes. That's what the title of our next agenda is going to be for policy committee.
I've been teaching preschool.
So when you go in to adopt this, because it's up for a second reading, I would just make sure that you put in the motion that you want the option to rephrase on that particular section about interim appointment. I can work with Bonnie on what that wording would look like in our break before the business meeting, if that's what you're thinking would be better. Okay, policy 1700 is board compensation that we have our hearing about this evening, where it changes the amounts that you are compensated as board members. I think it is really important to note how many hours you as board members put in that is not compensated, and how we constantly have to keep figuring out how we don't burn you out as elected officials. We did add some language in this based on some state code. You'll see that on lines 28 and 29, making some distinctions about what student board members are eligible to receive. They cannot receive pay. Also on lines 48 to 49, they cannot receive benefits. And then lines 57 to 63 specifically talk about the types of reimbursements that are allowed for board members in particular. It's really about professional learning and the conferences that you attend. And also specifies in lines 71 through 73 that if a relative or someone travels with a board member, that individual is not eligible for expenses to be paid. And that student board members, however, are allowed for those board expenses. So if you come to USBA with us, we will pay for those expenses for you. And then also adding on lines 81 through 88 that we have to follow the notice for a hearing, which we have done so for this evening. Do you have any questions about this policy? I just want it noted that our entire cabinet is in full favor of this compensation, and this is something that we were really driving because we feel like that you guys put in a ton of time. So and we appreciate the support that you give to education across our district. Okay, move to policy 3300. This we had up on business meeting last time. We struck out a couple of lines on, hold please, lines 129 through 131. It didn't make sense that if you read that line, a student's transgender status shall not be disclosed to individuals other than the student's parent without the student's and parent's consent, and then it said except as expressly authorized by the superintendent, and we just couldn't really think of any reason why that would happen, and it just feels like it really needs to be in consent with the student and the parent, and so we struck those lines. They are not required in law, so we went back through and looked at that, and so that would be ready to go. I do think it is to be noted that it I will say individuals amongst our staff have felt like it feels a little I don't know if the word is hypocritical that we're talking about civil rights in the beginning of this, and then it seems like we're trying to restrict that in some way because we're following state law as we are to do as stewards of state law, but it doesn't, I will just say from our cabinet's perspective, it doesn't sit well with everyone on our cabinet, so just to provide that feedback to you. Do you have any questions on policy 3300?
So it doesn't sit well, but it is in alignment with our state law.
So, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I know I reached out to Wendy about my concerns with this. There is a reading of this where that feels almost insulting right at the beginning to say, like, we are committed to non-discrimination based on, and we use the words gender identity, but then except for all of these times when based on our definitions given to us by the state, actually you don't have the same access. And I just want to acknowledge that I think that's painful and hard, and it's a reality that we're dealing with, and I hope people will reach out to legislators and share experiences and stories, and we'll all just keep trying to find, this is tricky and messy for people. I'm not saying it's simple, but I hope we'll have a lot of compassion, and I still like that. I like just saying at the start that this is something we want and value, and we want people to have their civil rights protected, and you know, we are going to support state law, and if someone doesn't feel that law serves them, then they should work hard to help be a voice for change. But I do feel like that's our job, is to be a steward for the law.
So that will be up for approval in business meeting. Now we're going to move on to our first readings. Policy 1107 is about board leadership. The only change on this particular policy, you'll see on lines 25 to 26, just added language that when a vacancy occurs in the office of the president or the vice president, the board shall elect a replacement for the remainder of that term. We will put this out on the website for feedback, and we'll bring it back for a second reading, as has been what we've been doing with policy. I think that's worked really well. I think it's good to be consistent. Did you have any questions about this particular policy? Okay. All right. 1108 is technically an existing policy, but I'm listing it as a new policy because we have never laid out in our policy what the specific duties of the board president are. 1108 had been what we are now proposing would be 1109. So just so that you're kind of understanding or thinking behind that. It just goes through and outlines the duties of the board president. There was one where I wanted to address. So if you go to line 191 to 192, there was concern about this comment, and I actually thought through this a little bit, because it says, as a state school officer, act in the public interest of the state as a whole when that interest and local public interest appear to be at variance. That felt to policy committee like, well, wait a second, we're local school board members, like what does this look like? As I reflected on that, I remembered that Devin and I included, take an oath to uphold the state constitution, and that actually trumps local policy, and I think that's what that is trying to encapsulate in that particular language there. And so I think that's what we have to understand, is that there's these different pieces.
Could we change the language to say that specifically?
Yes.
Because I think upholding the state constitution can be interpreted differently than just the interest of the state as a whole. That might be like, oh, this is what certain legislators want, this should be our interest as a state, which is not necessarily the Constitution.
That's an excellent point. Yes, let's do that. Let's take that back to policy committee, and we'll get that language changed.
I have to say, 200 lines on the duties of the president.
Now you know why I feel so overwhelmed.
That's not overwhelming at all.
I know, after going through that, I was like, well, I'm glad.
I was like, I sat and read through this, and I was like, I'm pretty sure there's like 500. There's 500 other things.
Yeah, we softened a few words though for you.
Yes,
around,
we did.
like,
Yes.
trying to ease a little bit of the pressure.
Yes. Okay, so we will put that out for public comment, but we'll also take that back to policy committee. If we look at 1109, this was previously the 1108 policy. We moved this to 11. It just made more sense to me to talk about those positions, and then the board president duties, and then these other officers. Lines 25 to 26 just adds in that if you are appointing other officers as a board, that as those officers, they must also take and sign an oath of office. Do you have any questions about that? Okay, policy 1400 is about board meetings. This is also first reading. They changed up a little bit the definition of a meeting and the definition of a relevant matter. Basically what it's saying is that for something to be an official meeting, it really is where you're taking action or discussing something where there's a possibility of action at a later time. It's not just a casual conversation or those types of things. We did change on line 30 rules to policies, only because I felt like it was redundant. But if you would like it to go back to rules, we can do that. Lines 44 to 54 provide specific requirements if you decide to expel a board member from board meetings, it does require a 2/3 vote. It does also allow that the board can add additional things if needed to that. And then lines 77 through 88 created a little bit of angst for policy committee because it states that on the agenda it needs to state explicitly how much time is for public comment. I'm just going to work with Bonnie so that it just states it in parentheses, and we'll just decide each time based on what the topics are, whether that will be no more than 30 minutes or no more than an hour. That traditionally has been, that's what the statute says. And I think obviously if we have something that's more controversial, or we have more people that show up than we, you know, or as we're anticipating that, then we can delineate that so that people know. 90 to 94 is lines basically that make sure that the board can't be held responsible if somebody says something in a board meeting in public comment, maybe that's offensive or that is defamatory or things like that, that the board members can't be held accountable for that. And then 96 through 100 is that there should not be debate between those that are commenting. However, it does allow you as a board, and this would go through the board president, to address, I think we've had this issue before where we've had parents concerned about ICE coming into schools, for example, and we addressed those concerns that came up kind of collectively because there were several people that commented. This policy does allow for that commenting to occur. It's not like you can't say anything ever.
I think the main thing is we just can't make any decisions based on something that's not already on our agenda, so we couldn't have that kind of a discussion,
yes, that's
right?
That's correct. But if you're clarifying a policy or a procedure because somebody's misunderstood it, that's an opportunity to do that. Lines 115 through 124 lays out how the board can respond and handle interference, like if somebody's trying to disrupt a board meeting. And then lines 141 to 155 talks about attendance by other government agencies, say a mayor or a county commissioner or something like that.
Or a county auditor.
Or a county auditor, exactly. Any questions on this particular policy?
No, it's free. Or the state tax commissioners.
Okay, the last one, policy 1450, is coming up for a first reading. We did go through and update this policy last year. The only thing we're changing is making sure the references to current law, all the links are correct, and it's going to the updated 2025 law. It didn't change anything in the policy. We just wanted to make sure it was linking to dead links from an old law, so we wanted to update that. So we just want to make sure we're bringing that through the proper process. Any questions about that one? There will be a look at that. I thought about that.
Get extra points.
Amazing. Yes. I love
Your gold
extra
star.
points. Oh wait, I got a pin. I got a pin from Shauna.
Oh,
I know. I'm excited. Okay.
Okay. No more questions? Great. Thank you, and thank you again to the policy committee. You guys worked so hard. So, we'll move on to item number 10. We'll turn over to Superintendent Dowd to talk to us about Admit Utah.
I just wanted to give you a heads up about something and just make sure that I'm not moving in a direction that makes you feel uncomfortable or that you're concerned about. Admit Utah is very similar to what UVU and the University of Utah are doing, where they're asking to get information, directory-based information from our students, so that they can send a postcard directing kids to go into an Admit Utah website. And basically what happens is then as the student is entering their information, it allows Admit Utah to get access to transcripts of students so they could be admitted to multiple universities in a single click. And we have run it through our privacy laws. It fits all of the privacy agreements. We are using a third party to do that. We would have to create an opt-in form for parents.
Yeah.
So we would communicate that out. Clay Bingham has been awesome about being willing to help us with that. And only those parents that are opting in their students to be part of it would have their data shared at that point. And so I just want you to be aware that as soon as we go in and sign this, which we're expecting to be able to get this done in the next week or two, we are the only district that is signing off on this, and so there will probably be a release of some press things that are tied to it. I know that we're one of the only ones in Utah County that works with the University of Utah, for example. Eventually, this is going to become kind of like the common app for Utah-based schools, and kids will be able to go in and do interest inventories. They'll be able to look at what classes they've taken and make recommendations about different tech schools and types of programs, and so it will help connect students. We're still in those really beta stages at this point, but that's the goal of this. And I love anything that's taking away a barrier for a student to be admitted to a university.
So I met with my daughter and her counselor this morning for her CCR, and they were mentioning that they're having a college sign-up days in the 1st of October, so we're trying to get this in place before then?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're not even aware of all of this yet. So that's going to be my job to tell John. I mean, John Anderson knows, who's over our counselors, and Clay knows, but we've been waiting for all of these pieces to fall into line.
I think it's great.
So
is this an app or a website?
it's a website, but it will also be an app as well. Okay. So it'll have both platforms.
Is it for just state schools or
It's
any
only
school?
state schools.
Okay.
Yeah, only state schools. And they're public schools. So like Westminster would not be on there, BYU would not be on there. Did you have a question?
The junior colleges. Like
yes, all the yep.
Okay.
MTech, SLIC, all of those would be part of it.
I'm just curious, you said that we might be the only district signing up right now. What are barriers for other districts or concerns that they've expressed in this process?
I think in talking with a couple of the districts, it's the privacy piece and just the going through and getting the permission. I would really like to make this a part of online registration, but then also have a follow-up in the CCRs with students so that we know. Because you're going to be pulling this information in with 9th graders. They would eventually like this information to be going to 7th and 8th graders, so we're starting to get parents aware of all of the different things that are taking place. One of the other barriers I think that happens is there's a view that there are certain universities that have kind of I don't want to use the word monopoly, but they're kind of assigned through USHE different geographical areas, and there are some superintendents and some districts who feel very tied to that. I don't feel that way because USHE doesn't feel that way. They're trying to get kids just placed in the right spot where they're going to be successful, and that tends to be more the viewpoint that our leadership team has, rather than saying, no, we're a UVU partnership school and we're a BYU partnership school. I'm all about getting kids in the right location.
And just to clarify, you said that if the parents opt in, then they just get a postcard that then they still have to go to a website to sign up for.
Yes, then they're going into, yes,
right?
that's my understanding.
So even if they get the postcard, if they don't sign up, then.
That's correct.
Good
Right.
information.
Correct.
So it's
So we're
still,
giving
it's
them
like a
their mailing
double
address,
opt-in
though,
kind of opportunity.
Right.
And the information is different in each of the areas. So at the beginning, if they opt in, they get the postcard.
Yeah.
So name, address has been
That's right.
shared. If they go to the website, then there will be additional information.
Then
That's
transcripts and
correct.
other things.
But they choose to say yes,
Yes,
I'm
that's
okay
correct.
with that.
They choose to be the one that.
Just to clarify, we're doing this just for 12th graders right now?
No, it'll be 9 through 12.
Okay, what is CCR?
Great question. It's College and Career Readiness Plan. And it's what we do with our 7th through 12th graders to kind of put them on track of what are your career goals, what do you want to do, trying to make sure that they're taking the right classes and
That you're going to graduate.
you're going to graduate at like
So do you
a
have
basic level.
the counselor, the student, and a parent have to be in this?
That would be ideal.
Ideal.
But not all parents come.
They can't always, right? Like if CCRs are during the day, I've missed them when I had to work and couldn't get out before. And then sometimes, a parent can, if they've missed it and they won't, have questions, find a way to communicate with the counselor on a better time.
Would this also help students know what kind of scholarship opportunities
Yep,
there
the
are? 'Cause
goal
that's
is
kind of
that
something
that'll
we-
be the second
that you
phase of
could,
this,
like,
and then the other
create.
piece that's a major goal is to increase FAFSA completion.
Okay.
They gave us an example in one of our meetings of a student who really didn't want to complete a FAFSA because they were like, I don't want to have student loans, and they're like, no, we understand that, but you need to just fill it out. That student had $20,000 worth of aid available to them that was not as a result of a student loan that they were going to leave on the table because they had not filled that out.
Right.
So there are these instances of things. You don't, just because you fill it out doesn't mean you have to accept anything that's given to you, but it at least gives you all of the
Right.
options that are available. So I just wanted to make you aware of that so you're not hearing rumblings of this and then you're like, what in the heck is our superintendent doing? So as we roll this out, I'll keep you updated on that.
I appreciate that you double check, triple check, probably make sure that this is okay.
Yes, we had the attorneys at USHE and USBE both looked at this to make sure it was in alignment with that, because I would not have signed off on that. And there was a whole bunch of information that they were wanting to share that they were just going to capture from the SIS system, like attendance data, and I'm like, no, you don't. So we were able to go in and customize it based on the data that needed to be shared. So
I think you should explain what USHE is.
Great
People
question.
who
Oh,
are
thank
watching
you.
and have no idea what you're talking
No,
about.
that's true. It sounds, oh my gosh, I have so many acronyms. Utah System of Higher Education, and it is the governing body that sets tuition rates and sets all sorts of rules about concurrent enrollment for all of our public institutions that are post-secondary. There are other acronyms I need to, okay.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you for that update, Wendy. Okay, we will now turn over to Devin to talk about the bond resolution that is in relation to the Timpview bonds that we already approved back in, was it February?
Yeah, February. It was February we approved them. Generally, when you approve the bonds, there's a resolution attached also that has numbers associated with it, so they can guess of what the interest is going to be and the total cost and everything that is included in that. So this bond is just to have that preliminary, it's called a preliminary official statement, so that there is approval of that. So when we go and do the bond sale, everything is taken care of. This week we're doing our disclosure meeting, to go through financials, talk about a lot of what we're at, what it's for and what it's looking for. We'll do our bond rating next week, and then we will also do, then the sale will be the next week and the funding will be the middle of October. So we're looking at, and we've been funding the project as it's gone because I wanted to make sure we had the maximum amount of time so that we use up our bond proceeds before we turn too much interest. So anyway, so that's all this is. This is just the preliminary official statement that needs to be approved by the board.
And it looks like, looking over this is a statement that then those who are interested in purchasing the bonds are reading through.
Yep.
And is it Zions Bank that helped us write all of this?
Yep,
to make
Zions
it
Bank and Brandon Johnson is our bond legal counsel. So he is the one who wrote up all the language for the approvals and the business meetings so that we can make sure that everything was okay.
Other questions?
Yeah. Some of these things I maybe, because I'm not a finance person, I don't understand. Yeah. But on so this is PDF page 25.
Can I look on your?
Yes. There's just a bunch of zeros, and it
correct.
Those are repayment plan.
Generally, those are final numbers on that page.
Okay.
So once we get the actual interest rate and numbers, those will be populated. Okay. There is another spot in there.
Yeah, page 29.
Yes,
yeah.
that has the predicted amount based on the bond market.
And then on the bottom of page 26, and also it was page 33. The years in our positions, it says Emily's been on the board for 4 years.
We'll make sure that gets fixed when it's finished.
You knew a lot more than I knew. I've been here for 4 years.
She's like, it's only felt like 4 years.
It's not the only
exciting. No, like I think everybody's is wrong.
Well, and it's usually the time from your last election.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's
So
not
the
necessarily
current term.
your
Yeah.
current term. Yeah, they don't do total amount of time, they do election to election.
Okay.
So I'll go through and verify all of those.
Yeah, and then, okay, and then the next page on 27, I was a little confused. So on the 22 bond and the 2010, it says current principal amount. Specifically, like, on the 2010.
So the whole principle is there, so let me tell you
So
about.
this is what's left to pay.
That's what's left to pay. So the way that the QSCB bond was set up back in 2010 was, we were putting money into a sinking fund every year. So, and then one balloon payment is made at the end of the year. Most, that is not super uncommon with lease revenue bonds, but when you're talking about GO bonds, that never happens. The principal and interest are paid on a regular basis. This one was structured specifically for one payment at the end. So that's one of the things that when people look at fund balance, that's one thing that's in our municipal building authority bond or fund, and the fund balance is that balance that we've been carrying for the last 16 years so that we can make the payment at the end of the year.
Because we have $6 million in 2 years.
$6 million in this year.
Just
We
this
will
year.
pay $6 million this year, in March.
Okay.
This school year.
Yep, so then I can have one line gone on our bond.
And that's
our
the
debt.
Timpanogos bond, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And then on page 53 and 55, it says the same thing. Let me get to it. Oh yeah. On page 55, there's a little asterisk that says preliminary tax rate, but it
Tax
doesn't
value.
say that on page 53, since our tax rate is not going to be 0.007017.
Correct, and that's, the new rates have not even been approved by the State Tax Commission yet. So once we get those, we can put that in.
It'll be updated.
They'll update it when we do the final statement.
So when we're voting on this later,
Yeah.
how do we word? Because there's no asterisk on this.
So
what
I
there
would
is on
just word it that you're approving the preliminary statement with the items that have been addressed, so to be addressed in the final statement, because this is just preliminary.
Yeah.
This is, so.
Do we approve a final statement, or by approving the preliminary, we
by-
are approving
yep,
that
you
final,
are
so that's what
preliminary,
you're
yep.
asking?
Yeah. And then on page 56 at the bottom, I did not know that IHC was paying property taxes. I thought they were
In some areas, they do have a couple of for-profit arms.
in Provo.
In Provo, but not very, they're.
80 million. Woo. Taxable value,
That
80
is
million.
Correct, but when you're looking at the size of the hospital and the clinics around, the actual valuation of it should be a lot bigger. So I don't know which building that is the taxable building, but it's a portion of the A building.
Okay, that makes sense then. Okay, those are all my questions.
Right, any other questions? Okay, and when we do this tonight, the language is in our agenda on board docs, and we will approve it first as the board, and then we will convene as the municipal building authority and approve it as that, and then we'll go back into our board meeting for that. So, and all language is in for us to do that efficiently.
They gave us our script.
All right, let's move on to the large purchase request. So, which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with the computer replacement. So this is just the annual employee computer replacement for the 149, about 149. Yes, so that we have a pretty robust replacement schedule that technology has put on so that we can make sure we have the budget and we're not waiting for machines to die. And so that's just our annual amount that we use for our employee replacement. The second one,
Can I ask?
yes,
How
absolutely.
long, what's the cycle on
4 years.
4 years?
So this is what we do at 4 years, is we take those old machines and those go hand-me-down to employees that may not be full-time, like part-time employees, a couple people that need a computer but not a brand new one. So that's our replacement cycle, is about 7 years.
Okay. The second one is for replacement, and it's really a van for technology. It's replacing a truck that they've had. What this van is for our AV specialist to go, because he's constantly taking those large interactive panels, the 75-inch ones, and it's a challenge. They'll have to borrow the box truck, and sometimes it's not available. So this is in order for them to be able to do that without having to play musical vehicles. And then we've also put some safety features in it so that if he hits the brakes, the television doesn't go through the...
Good idea.
Yeah. We want to save Kincaid a lot. So, well, yes, and he's listening, so we better be appreciative. So part of this is the truck that has been used has been moved over to maintenance. We're currently evaluating, because there is a couple of trucks that would be up for replacement, and this one is a little bit newer. So we're kind of looking to see. It's a big truck, big engine. So we're talking about possibly selling it and getting a smaller one that is not quite as
gas guzzling.
Gas guzzling. That's a great word. So gas guzzling, because it does take a lot of gas. Anyways, those are our 2 items. The third item that we were going to talk about is the
Devin, can I ask about the van? So is that out of budget? We don't, like, have we already budgeted for this?
This is part of the technology budget.
Okay. Okay. Not
It's nothing new. No,
Okay.
It's not fund balance that we're spending.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead to the next.
The third one we're not discussing tonight because we don't have numbers for the Wasatch Wall. And then that just brings us right into the next. You want to move us to the next item?
Wasatch Wall update. Well, you can share Devin, right, while we're waiting for when we get settled.
I know, right, yeah.
We did get an email with kind of a part of a plan, but
so
no
let
numbers.
me. Do you want me to share? Or do you want to bring up the document? If you want to, it's in the.
It is in
Word
Word
doc.
doc.
Yes, that's the.
I can share it. Probably
So I'm just going to tell you this is very preliminary. This is their conceptual idea. It's been shared with our. We do not have a total plan or a cost. So this is again probably not super useful to us because it doesn't give us final design and we don't have the final idea. So one of the ideas, and there's been several things that have been proposed. This one is the latest that they feel, that IGES feels could be our best solution, and this is just drains every, I think it's 10 feet.
Yeah, I think
right?
So. That says 10 feet right there. Yeah.
It's the geometry. That was not my. I'm good at math except for geometry. So it's every 10 feet they would put in a drain that would then drain down into the blanket drain that has been installed.
Regular collector drain basically to the blanket.
Correct. So this is, and I've had one return of the professional opinion, and AGEC says this is likely the most cost effective. There were some concerns that he addressed that I will send to IGES. I'm going to be really careful just because I don't want to. The IGES focuses a lot in their email about making sure that we find the source of the water. AGEC has an opposite view of it's not the source of the water we need to find, it's mitigating the water that is there. One of the things that I asked Hogan, I actually asked a few questions of, okay, so if if the whole goal for them is to find the source of the water, what have we done in the last 6 months to find it? I knew you were going to ask.
Because I was wondering right now, I'm like, okay, then what we have had plenty of time to find the source.
And what Hogan said was that they've done several things to explore in the meantime. So they are not finding any damp soil on the north end. It's really where they find the damp soil is on the east side, where it's not like puddles, but it's damp. So they're pretty certain that it's coming from the east side of the which I mean the east side of the building is the mountain.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I mean that's.
Can I ask a question?
I can hear the snark on her face from behind me.
Did they mention if they need to do any more demolition to accomplish this plan?
So that it will not necessarily be demolition as much as it's boring, I believe. So those
Two of Is that right?
Not boring. Not boring.
Not boring.
That's what I'm trying to say. Not boring.
Although
so boring.
I do tend to glaze over as we're talking about geotechnical
I know, that's why it was on your way.
And so boring could take on two different discussions. But right now, this is their conceptual design. This is not their final plan. This still has to go. I'm still waiting to hear from
construction.
Correct. I mean, can you imagine if the construction was based on little dots on the side of a piece of paper? I mean, I could, but that's not gonna happen. So AGEC did provide, said that they're fairly confident. There's a couple of things like with geogrids and things that I am not fully versed in.
But they want to make sure it's incorporated?
To make sure that they don't impact the geogrid that's currently there. Because if it's crossed, you could minimize the impact now of that geogrid that's there. And if they're watching, I apologize if I have messed everything up. I'm doing it based on my understanding that I've got. Of all of the emails that I have been receiving over the last couple of days. So I'm still waiting for Langen. This is a solution if Gina, Jennifer, and Meg remember that was discussed in our meeting with everyone that a couple people were a little concerned about. Just because, yes.
Yeah, so for clarification, at the meeting we did talk about like how much do we need to go towards the north on that west wall. So you're saying someone has come back and said it's not really as wet up there. So
are we
okay?
On the north side.
So far, AGEC is okay with those chimney drains not going past the stairs?
As long as some of those things about the geogrid are addressed. And so there's several things that still need to be addressed. IGEC said they probably need another week to complete the design and get us a bid. And so we'll keep on nagging. I do that a lot.
Thank you, that's a hard
And
job.
so
it's being persistent on something that's important.
Right. We just want to make sure we get it right. I don't want to necessarily, I mean, I certainly want to be careful with taxpayer dollars, but I also feel really strongly we need to make sure this is done the right way. And so it might not be the cheapest way, but I want to make sure that it's done the right way. And if everyone agrees that this will work, then we'll go with it. But at this point in time, we're still waiting for the third opinion.
I am curious if at some point when the numbers come in, if there's a way for them, for us or Langen, to even like calculate like what the difference is if we put in the right solution. But had we done that, like what's the extra labor cost to now doing it backwards and doing it now, and then had we just done this from the start? Does that make sense? Like that, like almost like an opportunity cost. I'm just curious if that can be part of the financials,
I can certainly
right?
ask. I think part of the issue is that when you're talking about labor cost, I don't know how much more labor there would have been involved in digging the trenches you're filling it with dirt, so that might not have been a lot more labor, but the materials for the drain and what we're using
which would be the same
would be fairly even. So
But Meg, if I'm understanding you correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong in my understanding of this, what you're trying to ascertain is, this is how much we would have paid for the materials and about what it would have cost if we had done it at the time, and the overage of that, because we're doing it after the fact,
Yeah.
probably shouldn't be our responsibility.
Yes, that's exactly. Like where we have said, yeah, we, if we should have done this from the start, we would pay for the materials that need to be in place from the start. But I want to make sure we also are considering the impact of having to do this now, and maybe you can't even quite quantify the disruption to the community, to the school. But, I just think those are some factors that I hope that we can communicate to them as well.
And I think there's additional factors that we have to deal with. I mean, public trust, So, I mean, there's a lot that can't be quantified that takes a long time to rebuild. And, the hindsight is always 20/20. We would have done things a lot differently had we known what was going to be the result. And so, yes, I mean, we can do all of that as we get closer to a final solution, and then
we work out that financial piece.
Correct.
I know we're all seem committed to really digging in and working with these construction companies to really look out for our taxpayer dollars and how we solve this, right?
Correct.
I know I'm just repeating.
Oh, and you're speaking all of our language. I think that's something that's in the forefront of our mind, period, let alone, trying to come up with a good solution to make sure that the wall has a long-term.
Yes, and making sure we do it in a timely manner to less disruption, and also we're coming up against weather concerns, right? So yeah, I think those are all.
So I've had 2 people review. One person is, or like our team at the district, is not as supportive of this solution as opposed to, what they had talked about in the meeting with the 40-foot trench that had the that actually had the drain that was wrapped in a blanket. Anyway, that one's a little bit more intense and would require a little bit, and those will all be addressed as we get that final plan.
Because I thought that was this plan. I wasn't understanding.
This does have the pipe at the bottom.
This does have a pipe at the bottom.
My understanding, I looked it up today, a blanket drain is actually, from what I read, I have to ask them, is like the gravel and the soil that's right up against the wall that brings it all down into that.
Correct.
At the bottom. So if I'm understanding this right, they're saying instead of opening that up and having to bring in all of that extra new fill, let's just do some pipes that we put in to save money and
correct.
energy.
And so far I have
fill with silt and dirt. We haven't filtered it because we haven't put a blanket around them. No, they would prep the tubes correctly, right?
And the pipe at the bottom is wrapped. Mm-hmm. And so the question is how much farther does it need to go? And right now it's angled down so that there's the single drain point, but anyway, I wish I understood engineering a little bit better.
Water, right?
But that's why we have some experts that are reviewing everything and making sure that our
second and third party looking at it.
So I have a question. We're on a time crunch to try to
Correct.
get this done. When do we expect to have finals done?
2 weeks ago.
No, yeah, that's a fair answer.
They said that they should have something to us by the end of the week. So my hope is that we have something from everyone for the all-day board meeting on the 19th. Everybody's anxious.
Something for us to approve.
Yeah, everybody is anxious for this to get complete and completed the right way.
Within, because weather constraints too.
Correct. Because a lot of the parking, the parking lot on the top may have to wait till spring because you can't asphalt when it's super cold. So there's things that probably will be delayed a little bit longer than what we want, but we want to make sure it's done right. So.
Any other questions for now? All right, thank you for that update. Okay, item number 14, consent calendar review and questions. Anyone have any questions on our consent calendar?
I do.
Go for it, Terry.
I don't know who could answer this. I had a conversation with a parent and they asked me, when someone puts in a request to homeschool, do they have to do this every year? Because I know when
No, they don't have to do it every year.
That's, yeah.
That's just one
So, before this last legislative session, they had to put in the request
Yes.
every year?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. And then, okay. Yeah.
It's just a one-time.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay, any other questions on our consent calendar? All right, then I'll draw your attention to our upcoming board calendar items. So we do have our all-day board meeting on Friday, September 19th. That's a tentative time right now. Tomorrow, we're planning the agenda for that meeting. So we will send out more details once we've got that. If you have any items that you would like to see on that agenda, please make sure you put it on our spreadsheet. And then also, if I would just like to put out there for our student board members and the advisors that help them, if we can just have an idea when our student board members can be there, and maybe we can adjust our schedule for the things that are more pertinent, but we don't necessarily want you missing important classes to be at our meeting. So, and then Leadership Academy at the end of the month, for those who are able to attend that. Fall graduation coming up on Wednesday, October 1st, and we've got Gina speaking at that. And then you see our next regular business meeting night is October 14th. And then, forgot to get that on here, but USBA, we have our fall regional meeting that first week of October, so I'll just send out a reminder, make sure you all have that. It's that Thursday, I think it's October 2nd.
Yeah.
And Alpine and Nebo join us, and we talk about agenda for school board association items.
We also have the golf tournament on September 24th.
Oh yes, thank you. Golf tournament September 24th for our foundation. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn our study session?
Move that we adjourn our study session.
Okay, motion made by board member Boyce. We will begin our public hearing followed by our business meeting exactly at 7 o'clock in the PDC. Wow, we not only caught up, but we just...
Yeah.